So imagine filling a wheelbarrow to the absolute brim with cash.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. You push it down the street, haul it into your house, dump it out on the living room floor, and then you just light it on fire.
Which, I mean, sounds completely unhinged to most of us today.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But you do this because the actual paper in that pile of cash is worth, well, it's worth less than the firewood it would buy.
Right, and that's not just some abstract philosophical metaphor either. It's a visceral, historical reality.
It really is. I mean, it happened in Germany in the 1920s and in Zimbabwe in the 2000s.
And looking at those events, it kind of forces us to confront this wildly uncomfortable reality about, that $20 bill sitting in your wallet right now.
Yeah, it really begs the question, when you look at that piece of paper, what are you actually holding?
From a purely physical material standpoint, you're holding almost nothing of consequence.
Right, it's just a small rectangular blend of cotton and linen.
Exactly, infused with some highly specialized color-shifting ink. But the physical object itself is completely useless for human survival.
I mean, you can't eat it to gain calories.
No, and you can't sew it together to build a waterproof shelter either.
So if the power grids went down and civilization vanished tomorrow, a stack of $20 bills would be arguably the most useless item in your house.
But here's the catch. The moment you step back into the realm of human society, human psychology, and economic history, that useless piece of cotton becomes one of the most powerful tools ever engineered.
Oh, absolutely. And understanding the mechanics of why it holds power, well, it requires us to completely dismantle our assumptions.
We really have to rewind thousands of years of human history and challenge the fundamental fairy tales we were all taught in basic economics.
And that is exactly the mission for today's deep dive. We are talking directly to you, the learner, who wants to understand the invisible plumbing of our modern world.
We're going to deconstruct the most successful, globally accepted illusion in human history, the money sitting in your physical wallet, or, sitting as pixels on your banking app.
We have a massive stack of sources driving this analysis today. We're pulling from the anthropological records of ancient Mesopotamian temple complexes.
Right, and we're dissecting modern economic frameworks like modern monetary theory and even decoding the foundational white papers of cryptocurrency.
The scope is deliberately vast because, honestly, if you only look at one obsoleted piece of the puzzle,
Like just the mechanics of modern central banking or just the archaeological digs of ancient Roman coins?
yeah, exactly. You miss the underlying psychological thread that connects a clay tablet to a digital Bitcoin.
So true.
I'm not going to spoil the destination, but by the end of this conversation, we're going to uncover why the traditional origin story of money is a complete myth.
We'll break down the exact mechanics of how ancient empires accidentally engineered inflation long before printing presses even existed.
And why the incredibly dense, sleep-inducing vocabulary of modern finance is actually a cloaked language of political power.
It's going to be fascinating.
But let's start with that $20 bill, though. If I can't eat it and I can't build a house with it, why does the person at the grocery store gladly hand over a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs in exchange for it?
Well, they hand over the food because of a deeply ingrained shared community agreement.
Right.
The $20 bill has zero intrinsic value. Its purchasing power relies 100% on the shared belief of millions of people that it represents a valid claim on real-world goods.
And critically, that others will continue to honor that exact same claim tomorrow and the next day and a year from now.
Exactly. It's all about that ongoing trust.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that belief, because it sounds almost like a multiplayer video game to me.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like if you and I are playing a massive online fantasy game, the digital gold coins we collect only matter because everyone else logged into the server agrees they matter, right?
Right, you can use them to buy virtual armor from another player.
But the second we log off, or the server company pulls the plug on the game, those digital coins are entirely meaningless. They have no physical reality outside the parameters of the game.
That analogy holds up remarkably well when applied to the physical world, actually.
Really, even with something like gold.
Especially with gold. We tend to place gold on a pedestal, thinking it's somehow fundamentally different from paper money because it's a heavy, shiny metal you can bite into.
Yeah, it feels real.
But objectively, gold is a relatively soft, industrially limited metal. Compared to iron or copper, which you can actually forge into a plow to farmland or a sword to defend your family, gold is practically useless.
That's a great point. You can't really build tools out of it.
Right. Gold's desirability is largely a product of millennia of cultural convention, not intrinsic utility.
The sources mention cowrie shells functioning the exact same way, actually.
Yes, across huge swaths of Africa, South Asia, and East Asia for thousands of years, communities used these little shells as currency.
They were just pretty shells from the ocean. You couldn't eat them either.
Exactly. Whether it's a cowrie shell, a gold coin, a paper note, or lines of cryptographic code, every single form of money in human history has been, at its absolute foundation, a shared fiction.
A shared fiction. I like that.
It's a social contract among a specific community that this specific object or data point will function as a medium of exchange.
The historian Yuval Noah Harari talks about this extensively in our source material. He describes money as the ultimate shared mythology.
And it really is. It's the only story that effortlessly crosses linguistic, religious, and political borders.
Right, you could have two medieval kingdoms that completely despise each other. They worship different gods, they disagree on fundamental human rights.
But they both implicitly trust the value of a gold coin.
Exactly. The reason it crosses those borders so effortlessly is that the power of money scales directly with the size of the network believing in it.
It's a perfect self-reinforcing loop of human psychology. It works because we believe in it, and we believe in it because we see it working for everyone else around us.
But when we look at those wheelbarrows in Weimar, Germany, we see what happens when the loop violently snaps.
Oh, absolutely. Those hyperinflation events are the ultimate proof that the physical object has no value.
In Weimar, Germany, in the 1920s, the paper money lost its purchasing power so rapidly that the very mechanics of daily life broke down, didn't they?
They really did. Workers demanded to be paid multiple times a day.
Wow, really?
Yeah, their spouses would physically wait at the factory gates to take the bundles of cash and sprint to the grocery store to buy bread before the bakery updated its prices at noon.
That is just wild to imagine. I've seen the archival photographs, actually. Children stacking bundles of millions of marks like they were Lego bricks.
And people shoving wads of cash into their cast iron stoves because the cost of buying a bundle of actual firewood was higher than the face value of the cash required to ignite the fire.
The physical reality of the paper didn't change in those moments, though.
Not at all. The ink was identical. The watermarks were identical. What evaporated was the shared belief that the central authority could maintain the fiction.
The community realized the government was just printing paper to cover unpayable debts.
And once that trust vanished, the physical cash reverted instantly to its intrinsic state, literal garbage.
Okay, I buy that the $20 bill is a shared illusion. But human beings are inherently skeptical creatures.
We are, yeah.
We don't just wake up in a cave one morning and collectively agree to hallucinate value into a shiny rock or a seashell. There has to be a mechanical starting point for how humanity started playing this game.
There is, but to find that starting point, we have to completely unlearn the prevailing origin story taught in virtually every third-grade classroom and introductory economics course in the world.
Oh, boy. If you're listening to this right now, you're probably about to feel a bit of mental whiplash.
Prepare yourself.
We have all been taught the barter story since elementary school. It feels like absolute common sense.
Right. The textbook narrative goes like this. Before money, I am a farmer with a surplus of chickens. You are a cobbler who makes shoes.
Okay, and I want shoes. So I walk over to your hut and offer to trade my chicken for your shoes.
But what if I'm a vegetarian and I don't want your chicken? Now you have to go find a baker who wants a chicken, trade for his bread, and then hope I, the shoemaker, happen to be craving bread today.
Which sounds like a total logistical nightmare.
Economists refer to that specific friction as the double coincidence of wants. For a barter transaction to occur, you have to want exactly what I have, and I have to want exactly what you have at the exact same time.
So because of that massive friction, the story claims our brilliant ancestors got together and invented a universal medium of exchange money to smooth out the process.
Exactly. Now you can just sell your chicken to anyone for a coin and bring that coin to me for shoes.
It feels so logical. But anthropologist David Graeber's research completely shatters this, doesn't it?
It dismantles it entirely. No society operating primarily through a barter economy prior to the introduction of money has ever been documented by anthropologists.
Wait. The textbook story simply never happened.
Never happened.
So if it never happened, how did it become the foundational bedrock of modern economic teaching?
The barter myth was essentially conjured into existence by Adam Smith in his 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations.
So he just made it up.
Well, Smith wasn't relying on archaeological evidence or field anthropology. He was engaging in a thought experiment.
Ah, I
He
see.
used logical deduction from first principles to imagine what a world before money must have looked like, assuming humans have always been rational, self-interested traders. He just assumed barter was the only alternative to money.
So if early tight-knit communities weren't painfully swapping chickens for shoes, how did my ancestors actually survive? How did they exchange goods without money and without barter?
They relied on complex webs of mutual credit.
Credit, like thousands of years ago.
Yes, the anthropological record reveals that credit, the tracking of social and material obligations, precedes the invention of coinage by thousands of years.
How does that actually work mechanically in a village setting? How did an entire ancient society keep track of who owed what without a smartphone app or a centralized ledger?
Well, in a small, early community of 50 or 100 people, everyone knows everyone else intimately.
Right.
If your neighbor's roof collapses and they need timber, you don't demand a pair of shoes in exchange for helping them cut wood. You just help them cut the wood.
Okay, so you just do it.
Yes, and a mental tally is generated within the community. The village collectively knows that your neighbor is now in your debt.
But not for a specific quantity of goods, right?
Exactly. Not for an exact price, but for a favor of roughly equivalent social or material weight in the future.
That is the exact same psychology as when a friend helps you move out of your apartment.
Oh, that's a perfect modern example.
Yeah, you don't hand them a $50 bill at the end of a grueling day of carrying boxes. That would actually feel insulting to the friendship.
Right, you buy them pizza and beer, and there's an unspoken, binding social contract that the next time they need to move a couch or they need a ride to the airport at 4 a.m., you owe them.
So the community functioned as a living, breathing ledger.
Precisely. Accounts were often settled periodically, not transaction by transaction. Many ancient societies used harvest festivals or religious ceremonies as cultural clearinghouses.
Oh, so they'd gather and exchange gifts to publicly balance the scales of these mutual obligations.
Exactly. It was a highly social communal system.
But that casual I owe you a favor system only works when you can memorize everyone's face. As populations exploded and societies built massive cities, that mental ledger had to become physical.
It did. And the sources point to the Sumerian clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE as the first major pivot.
Those clay tablets are totally revelatory. When archaeologists first deciphered the cuneiform script on them, they weren't finding receipts of barter.
No, they were looking at sophisticated credit ledgers. Picture a farmer going to the massive temple storehouse in the center of the city.
Because the temple acted as the central administrative hub, right?
Exactly. The farmer wouldn't hand over a physical coin to buy seed. A priest would physically press a reed stylus into wet clay to record that this specific farmer owed the temple a certain measure of grain after the next harvest.
Wait, so you're telling me the literal IOU is thousands of years older than the concept of a shiny metal coin?
Millennia older. They were keeping vast spreadsheets in the mud.
That is wild.
And they developed abstract units of account. In Mesopotamia, debts and wages were calculated in standardized units of silver weight or measures of barley, even if the physical silver never actually changed hands.
So the unit of account existed solely to measure the relative value of different debts.
Right. Adam Smith's timeline was completely backward. Money did not evolve out of barter to become credit. Credit systems existed first, and physical money was invented much, much later.
Which introduces a massive mechanical mystery for me.
What's that?
If these clay ledger systems and webs of mutual credit worked so brilliantly to coordinate huge cities in Mesopotamia, why did humanity ever bother going through the immense, back-breaking effort of digging deep into the earth, mining raw metal ore, smelting it down in massive furnaces, and hammering it into heavy coins?
That's the million-dollar question. That physical transition from abstract clay ledgers to heavy metal coins isn't about making trade easier for everyday people.
Really? Because that's what we usually assume.
Right, but the butcher and the baker were doing just fine with credit. The invention of the coin is fundamentally tied to the rise of massive state power and military logistics.
Okay, let's look at the timeline. It places the appearance of the first metal coins around the 7th century BCE.
Yes, and it happens almost simultaneously in 3 disparate geographic locations.
Right, the Kingdom of Lydia in modern-day Western Turkey, ancient China, and in India.
Which points to either a staggering simultaneous independent invention or the viral spread of a highly effective technology of statecraft.
The Lydian coins provide the clearest mechanical case study, I think. They were minted from a substance called electrum.
which is a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver found in local riverbeds.
But people could just trade raw chunks of electrum. Why go through the labor-intensive process of turning it into a uniform coin?
Trading raw, unminted metal introduces massive transactional friction.
How so?
Well, if I want to buy a horse from you and I offer you a lump of raw gold, you face two immediate problems. First, you don't know the exact weight of that lump unless you carry a highly calibrated set of scales.
That makes sense.
Second, and more importantly, you don't know the purity. I could have easily hollowed out the center of that gold lump and filled it with cheap lead.
So every single time I try to buy something in the market, the merchant has to break out a touchstone, pour acidic chemicals on the metal to test its purity, and balance a scale.
Exactly. That would bring a bustling marketplace to an absolute standstill.
So the Lydian kings solved this friction through sheer authority. They took a standardized weight of electrum and physically hammered the royal seal of the kingdom into the metal.
What's fascinating here is that the stamp was a major technological breakthrough. It transformed raw, suspicious metal into trustless money.
Ah, I see. By stamping the coin, the king is essentially declaring, I, the sovereign, have already done the measuring and the chemical testing. I guarantee this coin contains exactly this much precious metal.
Bingo. The merchant doesn't have to trust the buyer anymore. They just have to trust the king's stamp.
But we have to ask why the state wanted to facilitate this in the first place.
Right. Historians like Charles Goodhart point out that ancient kings weren't sitting around worrying about local merchants experiencing friction. They were worried about survival.
Survival, like defending their borders.
Exactly. They were focused on paying armies and extracting taxes. This is known as the state fiscal needs theory of money.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that. If I'm an ancient king, and I've just raised an army of 50,000 men to march on a neighboring kingdom, I have a massive logistical nightmare.
Oh, massive.
I have to feed those soldiers every single day as they march hundreds of miles away from our home city. I can't rely on the local credit ledgers of the foreign towns we pass through because those villagers hate us.
Right. The soldiers need a universally accepted mechanism to extract value food, horses, weapons from the local populations they encounter.
So the state takes raw metal, standardizes it, stamps it with the king's authority, and hands it to the soldiers as their wages.
But why would a local farmer in a conquered territory accept a shiny piece of metal in exchange for his actual edible wheat? He can't eat the coin.
That's a great point. He accepts it because the king forces him to, right?
Exactly. The state demands that the local population pay their annual taxes using those exact same stamped coins.
Wow.
If the farmer cannot produce the coins when the tax collector arrives, he loses his farm or his freedom or his head.
That is violently brilliant. It creates an instant closed-loop economy at the point of a sword.
Yes. The farmer has to trade his wheat to the soldier for the coin just so he can hand the coin back to the king to stay alive.
So the circulation of money in the marketplace is just a side effect of the state's military logistics.
Exactly right. We see this writ large with conquering armies acting as literal money distribution networks.
Like Alexander the Great. When he marched his armies out of Greece, crushing empires all the way to India, he wasn't just spreading Hellenistic culture.
No, he was forcefully injecting a standardized, monetized economy across entire continents.
He looted the gold and silver hoards of conquered palaces, minted them into coins with his face on them, paid his troops, and demanded taxes in return.
He forced millions of disparate people to participate in a single massive shared fiction.
But when a state builds its entire survival on physical metal coins, they run into a hard physical limit.
They absolutely do. If you want a bigger army, you need more silver. If the silver mines dry up, you have a huge problem.
And the sources point to the Roman Empire as the ultimate cautionary tale of how states try to hack this physical limit.
The Roman silver denarius provides us with the first meticulously documented case of inflationary monetary policy.
Oh, so?
Well, during the early days of the empire, the denarius was minted with a very high purity of silver. It was a globally respected store of value.
Right.
But as the empire expanded to its absolute limits, the fiscal pressures became unbearable. They had thousands of miles of borders to defend against constant incursions, massive infrastructure projects to maintain in Rome, and a sprawling bureaucracy to fund.
The expenses are rising exponentially, but the output of the silver mines in Spain and elsewhere is static or declining.
So how does a Roman emperor conjure money out of thin air to pay the legions before they mutiny?
Through a mechanical process called debasement.
Exactly. The imperial mints would quietly recall the older, pure silver coins through taxation. They would throw those pure coins into the smelting furnaces.
But before pouring the new coins, they would mix the molten silver with cheaper, less valuable base metals like copper or lead.
It's the ancient equivalent of watering down the drinks at a bar. You take 100 pure silver coins, melt them, mix in 50 coins worth of cheap copper, and suddenly you can pour 150 brand new denarii.
The emperor just magically created 50 free coins to pay the troops.
The state attempts to enforce the fiction that the new debased coin holds the exact same purchasing power as the old pure coin, simply because it still bears the emperor's likeness.
But human beings are observant. The marketplace is not stupid. A merchant bites the coin or feels the weight of it and realizes, wait a minute, this denarius feels lighter, the color is off, it looks more like copper than silver.
And when the public realizes the currency has been fundamentally debased, that the state is diluting the money supply, they react rationally.
They demand more of these watered-down coins to part with their goods. The price of a tunic or a loaf of bread goes up.
That is the mechanical reality of inflation. Over a few centuries, the Roman state incrementally reduced the silver content of the denarius from nearly 95% purity down to less than 2%.
Wow, less than 2%. It basically became a copper coin with a microscopic silver wash that rubbed off in your pocket.
Yes, that debasement destroyed the economic stability of the empire.
But even if the coins were pure, heavy metal presents a massive physical barrier to economic growth.
Oh, without a doubt.
If I'm a merchant trying to execute a long-distance trade, say buying 1,000 bolts of silk from a supplier 500 miles away, I cannot realistically load up 4 wooden wagons with tons of heavy silver coins and drag them across mountain passes infested with bandits.
The literal physical weight of the economy became an intolerable friction. To scale beyond local trade, human beings had to invent an entirely new, lighter abstraction.
And this brings us to a geographic pivot, because this abstraction was not born in Europe. It was engineered in Tang Dynasty China around the 7th century CE.
We are talking about paper money. And the Chinese invented it roughly 1,000 years before it gained traction in Europe.
A 1,000-year technological head start on the foundation of modern finance. That is wild.
And it didn't even begin as a state mandate. It emerged organically from the private sector as a logistical solution. The sources refer to the earliest iterations as flying money.
Flying money, such a deeply evocative term for what it accomplished. Let's look at the mechanics of it.
Okay, so if I'm a wealthy tea merchant in the Tang Dynasty and I need to travel to the capital to buy inventory, hauling strings of heavy copper coins is dangerous and slow.
So instead, you deposit your massive chests of copper coins at a highly trusted merchant guild or a provincial administrative office in your home city.
Right. In exchange for securing my heavy copper, the guild issues me a paper certificate, a receipt.
The ink on that paper verifies that the bearer has a specific amount of copper sitting safely in a vault hundreds of miles away.
So I can tuck that piece of paper into my robe, travel light, and ride fast. When I arrive in the capital, I present the paper to an affiliated guild office.
They recognize the seal, they honor the receipt, and they issue you local copper coins. Or they just accept the paper itself as payment.
The sheer velocity and convenience of transferring value through paper certificates drove rapid, widespread adoption across Chinese merchant networks. It was an efficiency upgrade that the economy desperately needed.
But as history shows us repeatedly, once a private financial system becomes utterly essential to the functioning of an empire, the government steps in to monopolize it.
Exactly. By the time we reached the Song Dynasty in the 11th century CE, the state had fully formalized and absorbed this system.
They banned private merchant notes and introduced the world's first official government-issued paper currency known as the jiaozi notes.
Okay, so the state is printing the paper. Did they fall into the same psychological trap that the Roman emperors did with their silver?
Oh, you better believe it. The mechanics of the trap changed, but the fiscal pressures of the state remained identical.
Initially, the Song Dynasty managed the jiaozi notes with strict discipline, didn't they?
They did. The paper notes were fully backed by vast reserves of physical copper coins held in state vaults. The paper was merely a proxy for the metal.
But the Song Dynasty was facing existential military threats from nomadic empires to the north. Wars require endless funding.
So an administrator looks at the vaults and realizes, we have 1 million copper coins in there, but we've issued 1 million paper notes, and hardly anyone ever comes in to exchange the paper for the copper.
The paper just circulates.
Right. That realization is the birth of the temptation to print unbacked money. The state realizes they can just print another 500,000 paper notes to pay for military supplies without actually putting any more copper into the vault.
Because as long as everyone doesn't show up on the exact same Tuesday demanding their copper, the illusion holds.
But eventually, the supply of paper notes vastly outstrips the physical reserves. The public realizes the paper is losing its backing.
They rush to convert it to hard assets, prices skyrocket, and the Song dynasty experiences the world's first documented hyperinflationary collapse of a paper currency.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources introduce a fascinating cultural collision here involving Marco Polo.
Yes. In the 13th century, this Venetian explorer travels to China, which is now ruled by the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan.
The Mongols had adopted and massively expanded the Chinese paper money system. Marco Polo was entirely bewildered by the mechanics of it.
He observes an unfathomably vast empire where the Great Khan funds his administration and pays his sprawling armies not with gold or silver, but with rectangular pieces of paper made from the inner bark of mulberry trees.
Stamped with the Emperor's red seal. Polo returns to Europe, which is entirely obsessed with shiny metal coins, and he tries to explain this system.
He writes accounts saying the Great Khan can literally turn the bark of trees into wealth by pure decree.
And the Europeans basically thought he was a lunatic or a liar.
The European mind in the 13th century was trapped within its own monetary mythology. To them, money had to be intrinsic. It had to be heavy metal.
The concept that a sovereign could just declare paper to have value and enforce that value across a continent upon pain of death was cognitively alien.
It perfectly illustrates how deeply a shared mythology roots itself in a culture. The Europeans couldn't comprehend the Chinese mythology of state-backed paper because it violated their own mythology of gold.
So how did Europe eventually wake up and catch up? Because today, Western economies are entirely built on paper and digital ledgers.
They obviously didn't just read Marco Polo's book and decide to copy the Mongols. No, the European evolution toward paper money happened much more organically, and crucially, it was driven almost entirely by private banking networks attempting to solve the friction of international trade.
Let's dive into the mechanics of that. The sources highlight the Italian merchant bankers of the 13th and 14th centuries and their invention of the bill of exchange. How did that actually work?
Imagine a wealthy textile merchant in Florence who wants to purchase massive quantities of raw wool from a supplier in London. Loading chests of gold coins onto a wagon and sending it across the Alps and the English Channel is incredibly slow.
It practically guarantees the gold will be stolen by highwaymen or lost in a shipwreck.
So instead of moving the physical metal, the Florentine merchant goes to his local banker in Italy. He deposits his gold there.
The Italian banker accepts the gold and drafts a highly formalized, legally binding document, a bill of exchange.
This document is essentially a written order instructing an allied banking branch in London to pay the English wool supplier a specified sum of money at a future date.
The merchant sends a courier with this lightweight piece of paper to London. The London supplier receives it, takes it to the local London banker, and cashes it in for local currency.
Confident that the banking network has already secured the gold back in Florence. Now, these bills of exchange were not technically paper money in the modern sense, because they didn't circulate among the general public.
Right, you couldn't use a bill of exchange to buy a pint of ale at a tavern.
But they served the exact same macroscopic function, allowing massive transfers of value across vast distances without the physical movement of metal.
And the system evolved further when we get to the 17th century London goldsmiths. I find this era absolutely fascinating because it mirrors the Wild West of early tech startups today.
It really does. You have private individuals hacking together a financial infrastructure to solve a user problem, and they accidentally invent modern banking.
The goldsmiths were uniquely positioned because they dealt in precious metals, meaning they had already built highly secure, heavily guarded vaults in London.
Wealthy merchants and aristocrats realized it was safer to store their excess gold coins in the goldsmith's vault than to keep it hidden under their floorboards at home.
The mechanics are simple. I give the goldsmith a bag of my gold, he locks it in the vault, and writes me a paper receipt that says, I owe the bearer of this paper 1 bag of gold on demand. It's just a coat check system for wealth.
But human behavior shifts. If you want to buy a horse from your neighbor, it is immensely tedious to walk across London to the goldsmith, hand in your paper receipt, carry the heavy gold back to your neighbor.
Who then likely turns around, walks back to the exact same goldsmith, and deposits the gold right back into the vault for a new receipt.
Exactly. So people figure out the shortcut. Instead of moving the physical gold, you just hand your paper receipt to your neighbor in exchange for the horse.
As long as my neighbor trusts that the goldsmith actually has the gold in the vault, the paper is as good as the metal. The receipt itself becomes the circulating money.
And that circulating receipt is the direct precursor to the modern banknote. But the goldsmiths were observant businessmen. They noticed a statistical reality about human behavior.
Which was?
On any given day, only a tiny fraction of their customers ever showed up to withdraw their physical gold. The vast majority of the gold just sat entirely dormant in the vaults.
Which leads to a wildly profitable, somewhat dangerous realization.
The goldsmith realizes he doesn't just have to issue receipts for the gold that is actually there. If a merchant comes to him asking for a loan to fund a trading voyage, the goldsmith can simply write out a brand new paper receipt and hand it to the merchant.
He is creating paper money out of thin air, backed by nothing but the statistical probability that everyone won't ask for their gold at the same time.
This is the precise mechanical birth of fractional reserve banking. The goldsmith has issued more paper claims on gold than he actually has gold in reserve. He holds only a fraction of the reserves.
On one hand, this is an incredibly powerful engine for economic growth. The goldsmith is creating credit, which allows merchants to build ships, hire crews, and expand the economy much faster than if they had to wait to dig more actual gold out of the ground.
True, but on the other hand, it's a massive fragile house of cards. It is inherently unstable.
Because if a rumor starts spreading through London that the goldsmith has made bad loans and might be insolvent, panic ensues.
Every single person holding a paper receipt sprints to the vault on the exact same day to demand their physical gold. This is a bank run.
And because the goldsmith printed more receipts than he has gold, the vault is emptied, the latecomers are ruined, and the local economy crashes.
Those frequent devastating cycles of panic and collapse are precisely why the state eventually had to step in. A modern, growing nation-state cannot have its money supply held hostage by the speculative loans of private goldsmiths.
Governments needed a permanent, centralized, powerful institution to anchor the paper money system. This necessity leads directly to the creation of the modern central bank.
According to the sources, the absolute granddaddy of this modern financial architecture is the Bank of England, founded in 1694.
But they didn't create it just to stop bank runs, did they? Once again, it all comes back to a king needing to pay for a war.
Exactly. In 1694, the English government was locked in a massive, brutally expensive naval war with France. The English treasury was essentially empty, and the king's credit was so terrible that no one in Europe would lend him gold at reasonable rates.
So a syndicate of wealthy private merchants approaches the crown with a mechanical proposition. They say, we will pool our massive fortunes together to create a brand new private bank. We will lend the government £1.2 million in gold at an 8% interest rate.
But the crucial part of the deal is what the merchants demanded in return. The government granted this new Bank of England a royal charter, giving them the exclusive, monopolistic privilege to issue official banknotes backed by government debt.
Wait, let's look at the mechanics of that psychological pivot. With the goldsmiths, my paper receipt was backed by a physical chunk of gold sitting in a vault. With the Bank of England, the official banknote is backed by the government's promise to pay back a loan in the future.
It was an institutional masterstroke. It transformed sovereign debt into circulating currency. It provided the state with a highly flexible mechanism to finance endless wars and imperial expansion without relying solely on the slow extraction of physical gold or the unpopularity of immediate taxation.
But even with this sophisticated new paper system, governments were still terrified of the temptation to print too much of it. The ghost of hyperinflation haunted them, so they tried to rigidly anchor this paper system back to physical metal.
This brings us to the 19th century gold standard. The gold standard wasn't a single treaty signed on one day. It was a gradual convergence of international monetary policies throughout the 1800s.
Britain formally anchored its currency to gold in 1821, and by the late 19th century, the vast majority of industrialized nations in Europe and North America had joined the system.
The mechanics of the gold standard are brilliantly simple in theory. If I have a British pound or a US dollar, I have the legal right to walk into a central bank and demand a specific, unchangeable weight of physical gold in exchange for that paper.
This effectively locked the global exchange rates in place. If a pound is defined as containing a quarter ounce of gold, and a dollar is defined as containing a 20th of an ounce of gold, the exchange rate between London and New York is mathematically fixed.
Right, international trade becomes incredibly predictable. The debate over the utility of the gold standard is one of the most fiercely contested subjects in economic history, though.
The sources lay out both arguments clearly, and as analysts, we need to examine them impartially. Those who champion the gold standard revere the austere monetary discipline it forced upon politicians.
The logic makes sense. If a politician wants to fund a massive new welfare program or launch a foreign war, they can't just instruct the central bank to print 1 billion paper dollars.
Because if they print paper dollars that aren't backed by new gold in the vault, foreign nations will notice, panic, and demand their gold, draining the country's reserves. The government is handcuffed by the physical reality of the metal.
Proponents argue this physical handcuff provided exceptional long-term price stability. Under the classical gold standard, the price of a standard loaf of bread cost roughly the exact same amount at the beginning of the 19th century as it did at the very end of it.
Inflation was virtually non-existent over the long term. But the critics of the gold standard point to the immense human suffering caused by that rigidity.
The most famous and influential critic in the sources is the British economist John Maynard Keynes.
Keynes viewed the gold standard not as a stabilizer, but as a barbarous relic. He recognized that a growing industrializing society requires an expanding money supply to facilitate new trade.
Let me make sure I deduce the mechanics of his problem here. If a country is booming, the population is doubling, factories are being built, massive new technological innovations are happening, but prospectors haven't managed to dig any new gold out of the mountains in California or South Africa. Doesn't the entire economy just choke to death?
Exactly. There literally wouldn't be enough physical coins to pay the wages of the new workers, no matter how productive they were.
You've perfectly articulated Keynes' core critique. Why should the economic destiny of humanity, our ability to build infrastructure and employ our citizens, be artificially throttled by the random geological distribution of a shiny yellow rock?
The gold standard was brutally deflationary. When the money supply couldn't expand to meet economic growth, prices dropped, wages dropped, and perfectly healthy businesses went bankrupt simply because there wasn't enough currency circulating to facilitate trade.
Keynes also argued that the gold standard stripped governments of their ability to fight economic depressions. If a recession hits, the modern instinct is for the central bank to lower interest rates and inject money into the system to save jobs.
But under the gold standard, if a country was losing gold to foreign nations, the central bank was legally forced to raise interest rates to attract the gold back. They were deliberately worsening the recession and throwing millions out of work just to protect the metal in the vault.
And ultimately, the strict mechanics of the gold standard could not survive the chaotic violence of the 20th century. The timeline of its dismantling is a study in crisis management. It begins with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914.
Because wars of that industrial scale are infinitely more expensive than the gold reserves allow. When the fighting started, the major European powers immediately suspended the convertibility of their paper money into gold.
If they had played by the rules of the gold standard, they would have run out of money to build artillery shells in a matter of months and lost the war. They had to print massive amounts of unbacked fiat paper to survive.
After the trauma of WWI, they desperately tried to put the genie back in the bottle. During the 1920s, they engineered a fragile restoration known as the gold exchange standard.
But many economic historians contend that this rigid, flawed system actually exacerbated the horrific severity of the Great Depression in the 1930s, because central banks were prioritizing the defense of their gold reserves over the survival of their domestic economies.
Then we get the Second World War, which completely reshapes the geopolitical map. Out of the ashes of WWII, Allied leaders meet at a hotel in New Hampshire to design a brand new global financial architecture, the Bretton Woods system.
Bretton Woods was a highly asymmetrical, engineered variation of a gold standard. Because the United States emerged from WWII holding the vast majority of the world's physical gold reserves, the U.S. dollar became the undisputed anchor of the global economy.
Let's define the mechanics of that peg. Under Bretton Woods, the United States government guaranteed that foreign central banks could always exchange their paper U.S. dollars for physical gold at a fixed, unchangeable rate of $35 for 1 ounce of gold.
And every other major global currency, the British pound, the French franc, the Japanese yen, pegged their value directly to the U.S. dollar.
So the entire world was mathematically tethered to the dollar, and the dollar was mathematically tethered to the gold sitting deep inside the vaults of Fort Knox.
But the global economy doesn't sit still. Through the 1950s and 60s, Europe and Japan rebuild from the war and their economies boom. Meanwhile, the United States is hemorrhaging money.
The U.S. is spending vast fortunes funding the Vietnam War and funding massive domestic social programs at home. They are printing billions of dollars and sending them overseas.
Foreign nations began to do the math. They looked at the massive ocean of paper U.S. dollars circulating around the globe, and they looked at the finite amount of gold supposedly sitting in Fort Knox, and they realized the numbers didn't add up.
The U.S. had printed far more claims on gold than actual gold existed. It's the exact same dynamic as the Tang Dynasty paper money or the London goldsmiths. The foreign nations started to panic.
France famously sent a battleship to New York to physically demand their gold in exchange for their paper dollars. It was a global run on the bank, but on a sovereign scale.
Facing the complete drainage of America's gold reserves, we reached the ultimate watershed moment in monetary history, August 1971, the Nixon shock.
President Richard Nixon goes on national television and unilaterally announces that the United States is temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
So if I'm understanding this, in 1971, we basically cut the rope, tying our balloon to the ground. What happens when the money is tethered to absolutely nothing?
Well, that temporary suspension became permanent. That singular decision birthed the bizarre, counterintuitive, entirely abstract reality of the money that governs our lives today. Since 1971, every single major economy on the planet has operated on a system of pure fiat money.
Fiat. It's a Latin word that literally translates to let it be done or by decree.
Precisely. Fiat currency is money that has absolutely zero physical backing. There is no gold in a vault guaranteeing your $20 bill.
It possesses value purely because the sovereign government declares it to be the official legal tender of the land and forcefully demands that all taxes be paid using it.
It is the ultimate manifestation of Yuval Noah Harari's shared mythology. It is a fiction held together solely by the institutional power of the state and the psychological confidence of the public.
Okay, this is where the listener's internal friction usually peaks. If there's literally no gold backing the dollar and the government can just print it whenever they want, what actually guarantees its purchasing power? Why doesn't the U.S. dollar just evaporate into Weimar Germany hyperinflation overnight?
Because it isn't backed by nothing. The currency is backed by the sprawling, immense productive capacity of the entire economy that uses it.
A U.S. dollar holds value because it represents a microscopic, universally recognized claim on the output of American society. Its wheat farms, its microchip factories, its software engineers, its real estate.
As long as the economy continues to produce goods and services that human beings desire, and as long as the state maintains the legal framework to enforce contracts and collect taxes, the currency retains its power.
But the mechanics of how this money is created today are deeply counterintuitive. When we look at massive systemic shocks, like the 2008 global financial crisis or the economic freeze during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government didn't send miners into the mountains to dig up more gold to fund the bailouts.
No, the central bank, the Federal Reserve in the United States, engaged in a mechanical process called quantitative easing.
Let's define the exact mechanics of quantitative easing, because we hear that phrase on the news constantly, but no one ever explains how it actually works.
It is essentially money creation by keystroke. During a crisis, the central bank wants to inject cash into the frozen economy. So the Federal Reserve logs into a computer terminal.
They look at the digital reserve accounts held by large commercial banks. The Fed then pushes a button and simply types new numbers into those accounts, instantly creating billions or trillions of new digital dollars.
They use those newly conjured dollars to buy government bonds or mortgage-backed securities from the commercial banks.
So the central bank physically manifests new money out of thin air, hands it to the commercial banks, and hopes the commercial banks will lend that new money out to businesses and consumers to restart the economy.
Mechanically, that process is virtually indistinguishable from legal counterfeiting, except for the fact that the state is executing it.
Which brings us to a highly controversial economic framework, heavily detailed in the sources Modern Monetary Theory, or MMT. Economists like Stephanie Kelton, Warren Mosler, and L. Randall Wray have championed this lens. Now, we are analyzing MMT strictly to understand its mechanical interpretation of fiat money, not to endorse its specific political policy prescriptions.
Impartial analysis is the rule. What is the fundamental mechanical insight that MMT argues?
MMT argues that a sovereign government that issues its own non-convertible fiat currency, like the United States, the UK, or Japan, operates under completely different rules than a household or a business.
A household can go bankrupt. A private business can run out of money. But a currency-issuing sovereign can never, ever go bankrupt in its own currency.
Because if a massive national debt comes due, the government can theoretically always instruct the central bank to push the button and type the digital numbers into existence to pay it off.
Exactly. Therefore, MMT posits that our traditional understanding of government budgeting is backward. We are taught that the government must collect taxes from the citizens before it can spend money on building a bridge.
MMT argues the reverse over. The government spends the money into existence first and uses taxation later, simply to drain excess money out of the system to control inflation.
So what does this all mean? The central bank is essentially the referee of the fiat system.
Yeah, that reminds me of the mechanics of a referee in a sports game. If you're watching a basketball game, the referee awards points to the teams when they score a basket.
The referee does not have a physical vault of points hidden under the stadium that he needs to collect from the fans before he can give them to the players.
The referee can continuously create points indefinitely out of thin air because the referee controls the ledger of the game.
That is a phenomenal mechanical analogy. The central bank is the referee of the fiat system. They can never mechanically run out of points to award.
However, and this is the critical constraint that MMT explicitly acknowledges, while the government cannot run out of digital money, the physical world can run out of real resources.
The central bank can print 1 trillion digital dollars in a millisecond, but they cannot print a physical barrel of oil. They cannot print a trained surgeon. They cannot print a ton of steel.
Precisely. The ultimate constraint on a government's ability to spend is not the availability of digital money. It is the availability of real-world resources, labor, raw materials, industrial capacity.
If the government prints massive amounts of money and tries to purchase resources that are already fully employed by the private sector, the result is inflation.
Inflation is the mechanical signal that the physical limits of the real economy have been breached. Going back to the sports analogy, the referee can decide to award 1 billion points to a team, but if the stadium concession stand only has 50 physical hot dogs left, those 1 billion points aren't going to magically conjure more food.
The price of a single hot dog is just going to skyrocket to 20 million points. Fiat money is an extraordinarily powerful tool for managing a complex modern economy, but it requires a massive, sustained psychological leap from the public.
We have replaced the physical scarcity of heavy gold with a deep systemic trust in the institutional legitimacy of the central bank. We are trusting that the humans running the system will not award so many points that the money loses its meaning.
But human trust in opaque institutions is fragile. And in 2008, as the global financial system crumbled and central banks were bailing out the very institutions that caused the crisis, faith in that centralized authority plummeted.
People felt the game was rigged. And right in the middle of that disillusionment, an anonymous programmer decided they were entirely sick of the fiat system, and they attempted to reinvent money from the ground up using pure mathematics instead of human trust.
Which introduces the most radical, disruptive experiment in modern monetary history, cryptocurrency. In the depths of the 2008 crisis, a pseudonymous entity named Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page white paper proposing Bitcoin.
The explicit goal of that white paper was to engineer a system that operated completely outside the realm of centralized human authority. No central bank, no government treasury, no corporate CEO who could unilaterally decide to type trillions of new dollars into existence or freeze a political dissident's bank account.
Nakamoto proposed a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The revolutionary mechanical innovation underlying Bitcoin is the blockchain. We need to define how a blockchain works mechanically. It is essentially a distributed, decentralized ledger.
Instead of one central bank holding the master spreadsheet of who owns what money, a blockchain works by giving a copy of the spreadsheet to thousands of independent computers around the world.
Whenever someone wants to send a Bitcoin, that transaction is broadcast to the entire network. The computers compete to verify the transaction using intensely complex cryptographic math.
Once verified, the transaction is permanently locked into a block of data, which is mathematically chained to the previous block. This creates a transparent, virtually immutable historical record that no single entity can alter or censor.
It effectively attempts to replace the necessary trust in human institutions with an absolute trust in mathematical algorithms. And to solve the inflation problem, to remove the temptation that seduced the Roman emperors, the Song dynasty bureaucrats, and modern central bankers, Nakamoto hard-coded a strict, unchangeable supply limit into the very architecture of the software.
There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. Ever. It is a fascinating engineering attempt to digitally recreate the mechanics of the classical gold standard.
Bitcoin enforces mathematical scarcity to mimic the physical scarcity of gold, completely eliminating any central authority's ability to debase the currency through endless printing.
But the massive debate in the economic sources is whether this brilliant digital experiment actually functions as money in the real world. Does Bitcoin fulfill the core mechanical requirements that a $20 bill or a gold coin fulfills?
That is highly contested. For a medium of exchange to function effectively as money within a broad economy, it must successfully perform three distinct mechanical roles. First, it must be a reliable store of value.
You need confidence that the purchasing power of your savings won't wildly fluctuate overnight. Cryptocurrencies, historically, suffer from extreme volatility.
A digital asset that can lose 20% of its market value over a single weekend is a very difficult vehicle for a working-class family to use for their grocery budget.
Second, it needs to be a universally accepted medium of exchange. And while crypto infrastructure is vastly improving, I still cannot walk into my local county tax office and pay my property taxes in Bitcoin. I can't buy a coffee at the corner store with it without jumping through third-party conversion hoops.
And third, it must serve as a stable unit of account. We price our reality in dollars, euros, or yen. We know what a $50 pair of shoes represents. We do not price goods directly in crypto.
A merchant doesn't say this car costs zero point 0.5 Bitcoin because tomorrow that zero point 0.5 Bitcoin might buy a mansion, or it might only buy a used bicycle. The extreme price volatility destroys its utility as a stable measuring stick for economic value.
However, the sources explicitly note that crypto possesses unparalleled mechanical utility in very specific, high-friction contexts. If I need to transfer $1 million to a supplier in another country on a Sunday evening, the traditional correspondent banking system will likely hold the funds for 3 days, charge exorbitant intermediary fees, and subject the transfer to regulatory scrutiny.
With a decentralized crypto network, I can send that $1 million directly, peer-to-peer, in 10 minutes for a fraction of the cost, and no government entity can halt the transaction.
It also provides a profound utility in jurisdictions suffering under dysfunctional or authoritarian states. If you are a citizen living under a regime that is actively destroying its fiat currency through hyperinflation, like modern-day Argentina or Venezuela, holding your life savings in a volatile digital asset like Bitcoin might actually be vastly safer than holding it in the rapidly collapsing local paper money.
It serves as a decentralized escape hatch for people who inherently and justifiably distrust their state institutions.
But sovereign states are incredibly jealous entities. They will not simply sit by and allow a decentralized, uncontrollable digital asset to usurp their monopoly on the issuance of money. And so we are witnessing a massive coordinated countermove from the establishment central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
CBDCs represent the incumbent fiat system's technological response to the existential threat of cryptocurrency. They are digital versions of a nation's official fiat currency, but instead of being issued as paper notes or managed through private commercial banks, they are issued and tracked directly by the central bank's digital ledger.
The most advanced implementation currently is China's digital yuan.
Let's use an analogy to break down the mechanics of how a CBDC actually differs from the digital money we already use every day. Right now, when I pay for a coffee with my regular bank debit card, the digital money isn't moving directly from me to the cafe.
It's like I'm passing a sealed envelope through 3 different middlemen. My commercial bank has to talk to the payment processor like Visa, who has to talk to the coffee shop's commercial bank, and they all settle their ledgers at the end of the day. It's clunky.
A CBDC completely eliminates the middleman. A CBDC is like the central bank directly teleporting the money straight from your digital wallet into the coffee shop's digital wallet in a microsecond, with perfect efficiency and 0 intermediary fees.
But, and this is the terrifying part for privacy advocates, while they are teleporting the money, the central bank is also keeping a permanent, unerasable video recording of the transaction on their master ledger.
That is the profound mechanical tension of a CBDC. It offers the seamless, instantaneous digital efficiency of a cryptocurrency, but it entirely retains the centralized institutional control of the state.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if the original genesis of crypto was to escape the watchful eye of the state and achieve financial anonymity, aren't CBDCs constructing the exact opposite?
Aren't they basically handing the government a high-powered microscope to monitor every single cup of coffee, every book, and every medical bill you ever pay for?
The surveillance implications are staggering. Physical paper cash is inherently anonymous. If you hand someone a $20 bill on the street, there is absolutely no digital record of that interaction.
But if an economy transitions entirely to a state-run CBDC ledger, the state gains an unprecedented panoptic view of every financial flow in the nation. Furthermore, the central bank could theoretically program the money itself.
Program the money, how does that work?
They could embed algorithmic rules into the digital currency. During an economic downturn, the government could issue digital stimulus checks that are programmed to automatically expire and vanish in 30 days, forcing citizens to spend the money immediately rather than saving it.
Or, in an authoritarian context, the state could instantly program the ledger to block any transactions made by political dissidents, financially excommunicating them from society with a single keystroke.
It is a massive, unresolved tension between the desire for frictionless economic efficiency and the fundamental human right to privacy, which brings us to the deepest, most critical layer of our deep dive today.
When we step back and look at the whole timeline, whether we're talking about ancient Lydian electrum coins stamped by a king, paper receipts issued by a London goldsmith, digital dollars created by the Federal Reserve, or an algorithmic token on a blockchain, the specific mechanics keep evolving, but the underlying truth of the system remains entirely static.
The history of money is, at its absolute core, a history of human trust and societal power. It is the story of the institutional frameworks, the cultural practices, and the technological innovations through which human beings organize and enforce their claims on each other's productive labor.
And because money inherently dictates who gets what resources in a society, the choice of which monetary system we use is never just a neutral technical question of math or economic efficiency.
Absolutely not. Every single monetary system is a profound political choice with massive distributional consequences. There are always mechanical winners and mechanical losers.
For example, the classical gold standard heavily favored creditors, the wealthy individuals and institutions lending money. Because the gold supply was constrained, the value of money stayed strong, meaning the debts repaid to them decades later retained massive purchasing power.
Conversely, the modern fiat currency system, which targets a low, steady rate of mechanical inflation, actually favors debtors, the everyday people borrowing money.
If you take out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage to buy a house, the inflation engineered by the central bank slowly eats away at the real purchasing power of your debt over those 3 decades. It mechanically makes the loan easier for you to pay back over time.
And cryptocurrency systems, by their mechanical design, tend to heavily embed the interests of the technologically fluent early adopters, those who acquired the digital assets when the network was small and cheap, over those who enter the ecosystem later or who lack the technical access to participate entirely.
Understanding this challenges a massive, pervasive myth in our modern society. It is the myth of monetary technocracy.
It's this widely accepted idea that central banking, the setting of interest rates, and the mechanics of monetary policy are just neutral, boring math problems that should be left to guys in expensive suits holding economics PhDs.
The pretense that monetary policy is purely a technical science and therefore should be insulated from democratic debate is itself a highly aggressive political posture.
When a central bank makes the decision to rapidly raise interest rates to fight inflation, they are consciously choosing to mechanically slow down the economy. They know with mathematical certainty that their policy will result in thousands or millions of people losing their jobs in order to protect the overall purchasing power of the currency.
That is not a neutral math equation. That is a brutal, real-world political trade-off regarding who bears the pain in a society.
The sources emphasize that this is why understanding the mechanics of finance isn't just about trying to day trade stocks or get rich on Wall Street. Understanding concepts like liquidity, leverage, and quantitative easing is a fundamental requirement for modern civic literacy.
Let's briefly define those, because they are the levers of power. Liquidity simply means how quickly you can convert an asset into spendable cash without losing its value.
Leverage is the mechanical act of borrowing money to amplify your potential returns, which simultaneously amplifies your risk of total ruin. And a default is the moment a borrower mechanically fails to meet the legal obligation of their debt.
These aren't just abstract vocabulary words for bankers. They are the exact language in which the most consequential decisions about the organization of our economic lives are made and communicated.
If you don't understand the mechanics of the language, you are effectively locked out of the most important conversation happening in your civilization.
You become a passive subject to the system rather than an informed participant in it.
So, talking directly to you, the learner who is stuck with us through this massive journey, The next time you are watching the evening news and you hear a financial reporter state that the central bank is engaging in quantitative easing or adjusting the federal funds rate to manage liquidity, remember that they aren't just tweaking a neutral dial on a machine hidden in a basement.
They're making a profound, highly calculated political choice about the value of your daily labor, the future cost of your mortgage, and the purchasing power of the money sitting in your pocket.
It is the raw machinery of state power operating in plain sight, veiled only by a thin layer of technical jargon.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started in the dusty, sun-baked temple storehouses of ancient Mesopotamia, deciphering clay ledgers that tracked human debts in measures of barley long before coins existed.
We watched ancient kings invent the royal stamp to pay their conquering armies and enforce taxation. We saw the Roman Empire slowly destroy itself by secretly melting copper into their silver.
We watched medieval Europeans recoil in absolute disbelief at Marco Polo's descriptions of Chinese paper money. We traced the mechanical rise and spectacular fall of the gold standard through the carnage of world wars, right up to the modern era of fiat money conjured by central bank keystrokes and the cryptographic rebellion of blockchain ledgers.
It is a remarkable, unbroken journey of human abstraction. We keep inventing lighter and faster ways to represent trust. But analyzing this entire arc leaves us with one final, deeply provocative question that builds on the absolute foundation of everything we've discussed today.
If, as Yuval Noah Harari suggests, the very concept of money fundamentally requires human trust and relies entirely on a shared human psychology to function, what happens to the mechanics of money in the very near future, as artificial intelligence begins conducting autonomous economic transactions?
That is a mind-bending mechanical thought. Right now, we already have high-frequency trading algorithms operating in the stock market. But very soon, we could have fully autonomous AI agents negotiating complex contracts, purchasing cloud computing power, or trading digital assets entirely on their own, machine to machine, without a human ever pressing a button.
When billions of microtransactions are occurring every single second, governed purely by mathematical logic gates and algorithmic efficiency, rather than by human belief, human anxiety, or human trust, does the shared fiction of money evolve into something entirely non-human?
Can a shared mythology even survive if the primary entities executing the trading don't possess a human imagination?
Does an artificial intelligence actually believe in the value of a digital token? Or does it just mechanically execute a function because its code tells it to?
If the dominant players in the economic game no longer possess human psychology, the entire foundational nature of the illusion might fundamentally alter into something we can't even conceptualize yet. That is a heavy, fascinating mechanical concept for you to mull over as you go about your day.
It challenges the very root of the psychological fiction we have spent 5,000 years building.
Thank you so much for taking this massive, comprehensive deep dive with us today. We traversed millennia of history to decode the invisible systems that govern our daily lives. I highly encourage you to keep questioning the simplistic narratives you are handed.
And truly, the next time you open your wallet, pull out that $20 bill and feel the texture of the cotton. Remember the clay tablets, the Roman emperors, the goldsmiths, and the grand, delicate, brilliantly engineered illusion that holds our entire world together.
You will never look at it the same way again.